Welcome to Developing the Leader Within podcast, the podcast that brings you leadership insights from the brightest minds shaping our world. Join us as we dive into conversation with trailblazers, innovators, and change makers, spanning every corner of the globe. Get ready to explore new perspectives, gain actionable insights, and become the leader the world needs today. Unleash your potential. Tune into Developing the Leader Within podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as this will help getting our show to others and help us to get to our next milestone. Today, we are speaking with Dave Tang. Dave serves on the Dean's Leadership Council for UCI School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. He is a career clinical pharmacist and has served in executive director and vice president positions for various major companies. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Enrique. Great to join you.
So good to have you with us today. And folks, we will be speaking about crushing your career goals, leadership tips from successful managers. But before we get into that conversation, Dave, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, Enrique, I'm a native Californian. I've actually been raised here in Southern California. Did go up to Northern Cal for university, and then eventually to the East Coast for pharmacy school. I started out, as you mentioned, as a clinical pharmacist, and I've worked both in the hospital and managed care settings. But I spent the majority of my career in the biopharmaceutical industry, so about 25 years, a little over 25 years. And I'm also happy to say that just last June, I had retired. So now I'm transitioning into a new phase of my life as of June 2024. And as you mentioned, I'm happy to be working with the Dean's Leadership Council for the University of California at Irvine for the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, as well as working with my alma mater for pharmacy school, which is the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Allied Health Sciences.
Well, I know that you are enjoying what retirement is. So many that are trying to get there. Both you and I know what that experience is like. And Dave, we're talking about management because I feel that oftentimes nowadays there is a huge emphasis on leadership, and rightly so, right? But there has been a decline on the talk about managers, and I think that it's time to raise that back up. So, what are the key steps that you took early in your career that set you on a path to success, and how did those decisions shape your leadership style?
You know, that's a great question, Enrique. When I think back, I think the initial piece was just really getting to understand the roles that you were in. So for myself, I started out as a medical science liaison and really understanding the different aspects of the role, really taking pride in what you do, being diligent, being a good colleague and peer. I think that is an initial starting point, because eventually when you move into your first managerial position, you're going to be working with many of your colleagues, or at least people who have the same experience, where you really want to make sure that you have that credibility and also that experience that would allow you to help them. Because in my mind, I think the hallmark of a good manager and a good leader is really the ability to help others, to really lift others, to help them succeed at their roles. And with the ultimate goal for us in a pharmaceutical company, for example, to help patients by developing new products or helping people better understand how to use the products that we create. So when I think about that piece of it, it really then transitions into, once you get to a manager role, thinking about how you can look beyond your current role. So not just focusing in on your own department, but understanding how your team interacts and impacts other groups, how it contributes to the overall business, and really going above and beyond. And for me, early on, that was the approach I had taken. I had started my career at AstraZeneca in the pharmaceutical industry. That was before I had transitioned to a role at Allergan and then ultimately to AbbVie. One of the things that I found at AstraZeneca was that by really going beyond my individual role within medical affairs, then I was able to help colleagues in ways that initially I hadn't thought about if I hadn't been involved. So I would say I'd summarize that also as taking more of an ownership mindset, where you think about not just weighing in on items that are specific to your function, but also sharing information that you feel may help other parts of the business. So, one example I had was even though I was in medical affairs, there were oftentimes questions from the sales force that I might help advise them as far as what the best approach might be. Now, one final piece I would say, starting out as a manager and also before I became a manager, I'd say an important piece is really seek feedback. Ask others about if there are things that could have been done differently, or during your annual reviews, use that as an opportunity to find out how you can improve or how you might help your team members better. That feedback really is a gift. And I think early on, by making it a point to always ask for feedback, I think that that was really something that had helped me in the future for my leadership.
Absolutely great points there for those that are starting out. And we're often asked to, hey, put some goals down, right? Have a point in the future that you want to get to. And then, kind of steer your way through the whole career process. But we often find that when we don't know what goals really are or how they apply to our specialty or our environment, these goals can tend to be something that will put us off on the wrong track if we're not careful. So, what common mistakes do you see professionals making when it comes to setting and achieving their career goals, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, Enrique, I will share one of the learnings I had. Then I'll go back to just some common mistakes that I see. And again, these are mistakes from my perspective. Others may not necessarily see that they're mistakes as much as just a different approach. But I would say one of the early learnings for myself as I transition from company to company. And I apologize because in the intro, I neglected to mention where I spent those 25 years in the biopharmaceutical industry. As I alluded to earlier, I started my career with AstraZeneca as a medical science liaison, then moved on to take on greater roles of opportunity, both in the cardiovascular space as well as the managed care space, but before finally taking on the role as VP of US Medical Affairs at AstraZeneca. Then I made a transition because I wanted to bring our family back to California. I was fortunate enough to actually take on the same role for Allergan, which is based here in Irvine, California. And with Allergan, I took on a number of different roles. And because we've had a number of organizational changes, my last role at Allergan, I was actually leading the global medical office. So it was my first opportunity to also work with colleagues around the world. Finally, at AbbVie, when AbbVie acquired Allergan, I took on the role of the global medical operations vice president. And that was one where, again, supporting our colleagues across the medical affairs functions, we were really ensuring that they were enabled to deliver on what their commitments were to the organization, but ultimately to patients. Now, I bring these changes up because the learning for me was that my mistake early on in my career was as I changed companies, and sometimes it's not even changing companies, it's about changing roles. I assumed that what worked for me before will work for me later. Now, every company, every team may have its own culture. And in fact, there will likely be differences in culture, certainly across countries, but across companies, across countries, as well as across teams. And one of the most important things as a leader, I think, when you're coming on, especially as a manager of a team where you're working very closely with individuals, in the beginning, take the time to really observe and listen so that you really understand, what are some of the norms of the culture? What are ways that you can work most effectively with folks? An early mistake I had made was I had the mindset where I really wanted to go beyond just my own role. So I'd be commenting on things regarding the responsibilities of other teams. Now, in the new culture that I moved into, that was not well received. I learned that quickly and I course corrected. And, I would also say that part of the reason I took that approach was that during the interview process, I was even told that that was something that the company supported. But I would say that, it's always important in the beginning to listen, to verify that that actually is the approach that's well accepted, because it's one thing when people are telling you that. But I think as a leader, it's really important to be observant to really ensure that that is truly the situation and that is the team culture that will help you be successful. The other two items, and as I mentioned, this is my opinion, I feel that there are almost two um, contradictory mistakes that people make early on in their career when they're setting their goals. One is when they lock in on a title, and it might be a level. So, for example, making my first jump to director is a goal for an individual, and as a result, they get so locked into that and ensuring that the only opportunities they're open to would be a stepwise a promotion to that role. And I think that can be a mistake because in today's environment, where I think there's really a premium on adaptability and the ability to handle changes, to understand a broader set of information. And again, as a leader, understanding how different groups interact and affect each other, oftentimes a matrix experience. So for someone who's early in their career, as you're trying to move into roles with greater responsibility, it makes sense to make a lateral move that gives you experience in an area that you didn't have before to gain a valuable skill set. Now, the I mentioned there were two that were kind of contradictory. The other side of it would be that people are not actually locked in or focused in on a specific role, and they basically just take a shotgun approach. And I've certainly seen that in my career where there are some individuals that are very ambitious. They also, I think, frankly, are looking for a change. So they take what I would call a shotgun approach. They're not really clear on what they want, but they just apply to many, many opportunities within a company. Now, within a larger company, what we'll see is that usually the hiring managers do get information about what other roles candidates may be applying for within the organization. So sometimes individuals may unintentionally hinder themselves when they take this shotgun approach where there really isn't much rhyme or reason and it weakens their potential as a candidate for a given role.
Great points there. And as you were talking earlier, it shot me back to an example I had of when a company tells you what it is they're looking for, and then you execute it at your peril. Because I remember as a leader being told, hey, we're looking for somebody that doesn't have to be told what to do. They can just take on things in it. And boy, don't tell a military guy that, right? Because I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You will deliver.
And I delivered only to be told that I needed to slow my roll because I was acting like I was there for 6 years and I was only there for 6 months. And I was like, duly noted, right? So you
Right
have to,
there with you.
and you talked about listening. So as the listeners, as the viewers are hearing this, it's wise, folks, to take on board all that they're giving you, write it down for sure, so you have something that you say, but listen to the environment because the environment will tell you what's actually acceptable and not. And we often don't do that.
I couldn't agree more, Enrique. In fact, I'd say that one of the important things early on is just take the time to listen and observe. Because as a leader, we all know how important first impressions are, and especially to your own team. And if you can avoid the need to then try to regain confidence with an early misstep simply by listening and observing, that really is a good investment up front. Again, in the early stages, make sure you understand not just what theoretically should be the culture and approach, but what is actually what helps everyone succeed.
Absolutely. Now, earlier you mentioned also ambition. And ambition, folks, is something that, hey, we encourage, but to be careful. Ambition sometimes can go haywire, and sometimes you could be chewing too much at one time. But I see a lot of people, a lot of leaders saying, "No, I want an ambitious person, somebody to come here and do, yada yada yada." And I already give you my example, right? So, how do we balance ambitious career goals like this step and that step and charting out your whole career to staying grounded and focused on the present? Because sometimes you can get beyond yourself. And what practices helped you maintain that balance?
Yeah, for myself, I would say that early on, um, being someone who was ambitious, there was a premium placed on new opportunities. Now, when it got to a point where it involved relocation, and especially with a young family, that was where I needed to take a step back. And I'd say for all aspiring leaders, as you start progressing in your career, I would say periodically take a step back and think about what's really most important to you and your life. Think about what responsibilities you have, both in the workplace, but I'd say just as importantly outside of the workplace. And that will help you set your priorities that then help you determine, how far you can go in pursuit of your ambitions. And I'll give you an example for that. When you think about what's most important, for myself personally, it would be my family. In fact, that actually is what led to my decision to come back to California and change companies, because I will tell you that I was very happy at AstraZeneca. It was a company that was very, very honorable to work for. It was very good. AstraZeneca was very good to me. Had no issues when I left, but it was because of family commitments that had me make that change. Now, fortunately, there were other opportunities that I was able to identify, but because I knew that that was the priority, I would say my ambitions had to then be adjusted to ensure that I could support that piece. The other reason why it's important to really assess that is, you know, when you think about your life, you also know how much those around you are able to support you through those ambitions. I will say up front, I could not have done anything from a career standpoint, these major changes, without the support of my wife, and really ensuring that I talked with her about it and understood, what was most important there. At the time we had young kids as well, to understand what would be best for the family. That really helped me stay balanced. So for me, being thoughtful and discussing what was most important for us as a family unit, that helped me understand, like, okay, so what are kind of the um, areas where my ambition needs to take into account certain parameters. So, uh, do we need more family support nearby, or is there an opportunity? When they were really young, that was really when we had the opportunity to move cross country to the East Coast, because at that time, the kids didn't have those ties, and there weren't as many needs at that time. So I also say do this periodically, because life changes and our priorities change and our needs change and situations change. So understanding that often helps you set that balance for your ambitions. So that's what's helped me. And again, for me, the core has really been focusing on the family.
I had an opportunity back in right at the onset of the pandemic that was dubbed a opportunity of a lifetime. I'll leave it there. Right? It truly was. But as you just mentioned, I had a situation brewing, one that I dealt with today. It was already, happening, and I had to really confer. I brought the whole family in it, and we said, hey, this is the opportunity. This is where I'm able to go. And as a Navy guy, senior enlisted, I had all kind of ambition, right? So it, I really wanted to do it. I think it was a good thing for me as a provider to do it, but we ended up on that it would not be good for the family,
Yeah.
and I had to let it slide by. I mean, it hurt. I'm not gonna say it didn't, but you have to make that choice. And to your point, in your career, for those listening, you're gonna have these points where priorities will overlap your level of ambition, or at least you will have to let it leapfrog you in that particular instance for maybe a future opportunity. It doesn't mean that that's end all to be all and your career is over. And no, it's just that if as a leader or manager you don't know how to prioritize things for yourself, how you gonna help somebody else do it,
I,
right? And
I agree, and I respect you for making that decision, Enrique, because I will say that because you know what was most important to you and you were grounded in that, you made a decision where also, had you pursued that opportunity, and I can speak for myself, if I'd gone for an opportunity that wasn't aligned with what was most important for myself, for my family, you'd have that dragging you back, that disconnect, that discord there. That's actually going to hinder you in how successful you are, because you're going to have other distractions in your mind because you made a decision that actually wasn't necessarily in the best interest of what your true priorities are.
Exactly. And as we're talking about being held back and stuck, there are oftentimes situations in our careers that we feel stuck. I know in the military, I felt stuck for about 10 years when I was in a spot, a rank for 10 years. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to get to 20 years and I'm not going to progress. And lo and behold, in a period of 3 years, I went up 2 ranks. So, but, but sometimes we feel stuck, right? So, what advice would you give someone who's feeling stuck in their current role and wants to move up? And what can they start doing today to break through?
Yeah, and Enrique, first of all, thank you for your dedication and your service to the country and all that you've done. And through your career path, I think you set up a great example where it is difficult at times because depending on the reason why an individual feels stuck, there might be different approaches that they can take. Now, sometimes it's a matter of just you look around and you're seeing your colleagues, your folks that you thought were kind of your peers in your cohort moving ahead maybe quicker than you are, or taking on different types of opportunities. And I think it's natural for many of us who are managers or who are going into leadership. We're all competitive, and I think there's that urge to say, hey, I should be doing more, or something, I should be doing something different. Now, there's that, and some of that is just making sure that you are patient. I think you gave a great example of saying that if you're just rushing it for that, you can't necessarily tell the future and what opportunities are coming. But I would also say then there are some variations, because other people feel stuck because they feel bored, or they feel stuck because they're working with colleagues or maybe have a manager that they don't enjoy working with. So, really, depending on what the reason is that an individual feels stuck, they need to first get a proper diagnosis on that before they start thinking about taking actions to break through. Because if you take the wrong approach, it actually may not be that helpful for you in the longer term. So, example that I will share is that you know many times people are in a particular role that has certain characteristics. One of the roles that we had in the pharmaceutical industry were field-based roles. Uh, Now, these medical science liaison roles could be based pretty much anywhere in the country. Um, these roles had quite a bit of flexibility, but I'd say historically the challenge was that individuals felt that they had fewer options, because at the time, many companies, when you started moving into some of these more strategic or brand focused roles, you would need to move into one of the headquarter sites, because that generally would be where the rest of the team would be. I think there's a lot of belief in the value of teamwork, partnership, face to face interaction. I know a lot of that has changed now. So maybe opportunities, at least from what I've seen right before I retired, I think there's greater opportunities there. But individuals have to ask themselves, what am I willing to commit to for that next step? If I feel stuck, but I'm unwilling to move, I want to stay in my hometown. I like where I'm at. My kids are happy in the school they're at. My wife is happy with her role. If you're unwilling to make that change, then I think you've also made that decision to say that there may be certain opportunities that are out of scope for you because you're not able to meet the needs of the business. Because ultimately, for each of us as leaders, what we are bringing as leaders ultimately should be contributing to the business itself. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that we need to stay with one organization. Oftentimes, you might find a new opportunity, and sometimes the biggest step you can make is actually getting out of your comfort zone, maybe going to a new organization. But before you make that decision, you need to really carefully consider what is it that you currently have, what's most important to you, and whether that is something that you're willing to give up in order to pursue a new opportunity. So, in general, for someone who's feeling stuck, take a step back. Think about why it is that you're stuck. Because if it's simply that you're bored, there are plenty of projects that you could take on. I'm sure that most companies are willing to assign special projects to individuals who are, willing and eager to pursue to gain some new experience. If it is something truly where you're having some issues with the team that you're a part of, that's probably a more urgent issue. It's one where you should consider exploring new opportunities, but also, be sure that you take an assessment of what it is that you bring to the table and what you're willing to change in order to pursue new types of opportunities. So those are my thoughts on what you can do if you're feeling stuck.
Yeah, great thoughts there. And, back to that point that you have to assess how much you're willing to give for a change, right? Because you say, "Oh, I want to be director," but director may not be in your region. You might have to go to another region in order for you to have a shot at director. It's not promised, right? But at least putting yourself in the place where you can have a shot. Now, as we develop through our career, we get a lot of tools, we get a lot of information. There's a lot of knowledge passed. We have mentors, we have schooling. There's a lot that comes our way. And sometimes we have what it takes, but we don't know exactly what it is that's going to get us to that next level. So, in your experience, what's the most underrated skill that aspiring managers should develop to crush their career goals?
I think the most underrated is probably being a good listener. I think oftentimes when people think of leaders or managers, they might think of people who are strong leaders, who are kind of drivers. But I would say the most underrated skill is a leader who is a good listener. And when I say listener, it's not just that they give others a chance to speak, but when they are listening to others, they're actually understanding the situation. They're not thinking about, what's the next thing they're going to say in response. They're actually thinking about, how can I help this individual either, find a better solution, improve what they're doing, or how can I support them with what they want to accomplish. The other advantage to listening to others is that, throughout my career, especially as you start moving up in the organization, you're going to find that your success is really through the success of your teams as well. And it's really that shared brilliance of all the people on your team that are going to differentiate uh, your group from others. And listening and being able to take good ideas wherever they might come from. And then again, sharing your experiences, your wisdom as a leader to perhaps help shape it. Or sometimes it's lending your support, as an executive. Sometimes it's just getting that executive sponsorship behind a project that's meaningful. I think that's probably the one that's most important. And it ties into another skill, which is that as you listen, I think it also makes you more empathetic to others. And as leaders, there are going to be times where we all have to make difficult decisions, or we have to communicate difficult decisions that impact people's lives. And I would say that, even when you have to deliver bad news, if you're able to listen and be empathetic and be as supportive as you can, treat people with respect, I think that's critically important. One of my mentors had always, stressed that years from now, people aren't really going to remember what you said on any given day or what you did. I think there's a Maya Angelou quote that says, they may not remember what you said, but they will certainly remember how you made them feel. So, in my experience, I think being a good listener, but again, an active listener and someone who's able to then use what they hear to help others, I think that's really an underrated skill.
Very powerful observation on that one. I did a survey, I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, on leadership, and the one skill that people thought that was missing the most, and listening was number one. So even 4 or 5 years later, we're still talking about listening, and it's very important. So, folks, if you're in a management position or you're in a leadership position, and you analyze yourself and the way you do things, and leadership doesn't stand out as one of those key things that you provide your people, it's time to step back a little and start to add some of that, because I'll tell you that your people will praise you for it in the long run. Maybe not immediately, but in the long run. Now, Dave, we collaborated. You talk about collaborating. We collaborated on the Latino Leadership Playbook. I'll make sure to have a link to that great publication in the show notes so that you guys can, or gals can, get a wind of that book. But what do you have coming up now that you're on the other side of employment, retired? And how can the viewer get, or the listener get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and what you've done or you're doing now with the university.
Well, Enrique, as you well know, you know, just because you're retired doesn't mean that you're no longer busy. In fact, you're just as busy, but now you get to work on things that you really want to work on, not things that you have to do in some cases. For myself, I'm actually finishing up some coursework to support me in one of my personal interests, which is really around financial planning, financial literacy. So for me, what's coming up is really I enjoy working with the next generation, and as you mentioned earlier, with the universities, the schools of pharmacy. So I have the pleasure and honor of working with uh, one of the oldest schools of pharmacy, which is the School of Pharmacy I attended, Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Allied Health Sciences. Uh, just celebrated their 200th year. So uh, they've been here a while, and I'm glad to be a part of any support here on the West Coast for the school, as well as one of the newest schools, the UC Irvine School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. In fact, that school is coming up on graduating their very first class of pharmacists. They've been well established in the pharmaceutical sciences side, but as far as graduating new pharmacists, their first class is coming up. So working with those groups, that's been a pleasure. As I mentioned earlier, the financial literacy piece is important. So also doing volunteer work to help expand that, working with different groups to help um, educate newer generations on how they can better prepare for their future so that ultimately they can get to a point where they have that flexibility. As far as connecting, anyone who'd like to connect, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm in there as David Tang. Hopefully, the picture I have in there still looks somewhat like me now, and that would make it easy for you to identify me. That's probably the best way for me to connect with others.
Well, folks, we'll have all that information as part of the video and show notes for you to connect with Dave and all that he's doing. Dave, it's been a pleasure to have you speak about management and all the career things that we can face as we're going down the road into leadership, right? And it's important for us not to forget about the management piece. That's still basically the backbone of all things when we're talking about work. So, thank you for sharing that with us, and it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Enrique.
Folks, today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, The Outlier Project, and Duco. And if you've enjoyed the episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment. We're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And this podcast is brought to you by StreamYard, a browser based tool that lets you live stream to any platform. And we're recording this podcast using it. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.